Hello, welcome to Exe Files on Phonic FM 106.8. I am your host, Alison Rockbrand, and I'm here with my co-host, Richard Freeman. Hello, Richard.
Hello, hello, wireless listeners. That was the Alan Parsons project with The Raven, of course, based on the classic poem by Edgar Allan Poe.
Yes, very good. That was Richard's choice for this evening. We've got some other Halloween music coming up. This is our Halloween special. We are going to be on for 2 hours instead of our usual 1 hour. So it is the witching hour, and we're going to be on for 2 entire hours. We've got some old-time radio coming up and some other scintillating horror tales. We've also got a special guest, John Phillip from Four of Swords Theatre, who's going to be coming in to do a ghost story reading live on the air. We've also got Jonathan Dymond in the studio, who's going to be reading a poem as well. So we've got some live reading in the studio and some old-time radio from the internet to play for you. So it's going to be a very, very, very excellent evening. I don't know what that strange noise is, but I'm going to be taking down this, okay, for now. What else? Yes. What was I saying? Right. Old Time Radio, horror stories, 2 hour special, news, paranormal news, which is coming up in a moment, and special guest Philip John and Jonathan Dymond, and what else?
Some more interesting music, I believe.
Yeah, more interesting music is coming up.
Biggles the tap dancing elephant.
Oh, that's what I was going to say. We are going to have some creepy stories from me and Richard towards the end of the evening, some of our own paranormal adventures and or strange tales. So wait for that. Let's have some news with Richard now. Paranormal news.
Hello, and guess where we're back at? We can't stay away from the place, Siberia again, which must be the weirdest place in the world. 2 almost perfectly preserved cave lion cubs have been found in the permafrost in Yakutia, Siberia. Panthera spalia was the largest lion that ever existed, growing to 3.9 feet tall at the shoulders, 10% larger than the modern lion, and it lived from 500,000 years ago to only around 2,000 years ago. The newly found cubs are at least 10,000 years old. In the past, the area has yielded woolly rhinos, mammoths and prehistoric bison, all found frozen in the permafrost. The cubs will undergo study until the end of November, when the full details of the findings will be presented. Back to England, merry old England. St Anne's Castle pub in the village of Great Lees in Essex is said to be one of the most haunted in England. The owner, Graham Downham, discovered a strange object whilst renovating the car park. It turned out to be a witch's stone. Legend has it that a witch was buried under the stone on Scrap Faggot Green, which is an old name for a witch, a scrap faggot. And Scrap Faggot Green is around about where the pub's car park is situated now. It was supposed to have happened in 1563. The witch had a stake put through her heart and was buried under this boulder known as the witch's stone, or witch's rock. In World War II, the rock was moved to allow American artillery trucks to pass through. Afterwards, violent poltergeist activity broke out in the village, such as bales of hay being thrown around and cattle strangely moving from one farmer's field to another farmer's field. So it was thought to be the spirit of the witch set free. And now the ancient stone's been found again. I wonder what's going to happen. In the lead up to Halloween, the US National Archive has been showing off some of its creepiest documents. One is the official policy from the State Department telling travellers what to do if they encounter a Yeti whilst exploring Nepal. It states that the Yeti may be photographed or captured alive, but not shot unless in self-defence. The creature and all the photographs must be handed over to the Nepalese government. A permit for a Yeti hunt cost 5,000 rupees, made payable once again to the government of Nepal. Any reports throwing light onto what the creature is must also be submitted to the government.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much. We're going to listen to a song now. This is from one of my favorite films, Halloween, and we're going to listen to the soundtrack. So listen up for that, and we'll be right back with a poem from Jonathan Dymond.
Phonic FM, 106.8 FM.
Hello, welcome back. That was John Carpenter's Halloween, one of my favorite films and one of my favorite soundtracks, which I believe, I'm correct in saying this, and it was written by John Carpenter himself. I think that is the case. If anyone knows any better, send us an email and correct us. But I was watching the film recently, and I'm pretty sure that the theme was written by John Carpenter. Amazing movie. Don't know about all of the rest of them. Some of them are okay, but some of them are not that great.
Season of the Witch was dreadful.
I know. That is seriously the one that I actually hate the most. But some people love it, actually. Some people think that's one of their favorite ones. So when I was watching it recently, I was on these like websites, like checking out what people thought of it, nowadays. And a lot of people said that Season of the Witch was their favorite one. But my favorite one is the original. Just something about it. Okay, Jonathan Dymond, thank you very much. The past couple of weeks you've been our co-host, and while Richard's been away, and you've been great, and you've read some really interesting poetry, so you've come back again
back again with more from the fairy world. And
this is a special Halloween poem, right?
Yeah, this is, people probably most know this from the Fairport Convention version with the wonderful voice of Sandy Denny, the late great Sandy Denny. Does a wonderful rendition of this. This is Tam Lin, and is yet another story of people being led astray by the fairies. I probably should broaden my repertoire from
fairies are good.
World,
we all love fairies.
This is where I seem to always end up.
Right. Well, let's have a listen.
Oh, I forbid you maidens all that wear gold in your hair to travel to Carter Hall, for young Tam Lin is there. None that go by Carter Hall, but they leave him a pledge, either their mantles of green, or else their maidenhood. Janet tied a kirtle green a bit above her knee, and she's gone to Carter Hall as fast as go can she. She'd not pulled a double rose, but only two, when up then spoke young Tam Lin, says, Lady, pull no more. And why come you to Carter Hall without command from me? I'll come and go, young Janet says, and ask no leave of you. So Janet tied a kirtle green a bit above her knee, and she's gone to her father as fast as go can she. When up then spoke her father dear, and he spoke meek and mild. Oh, alas, Janet, he said, I believe you go with child. Well, if that be, so Janet said, myself shall bear the blame. There's not a knight in all your hall shall get the baby's name. For if my love were an earthly knight, as he is an elfin grey, I'd not change my own true love for any knight you have. So Janet tied a kirtle green a bit above her knee, and she's gone to Carter Hall as fast as go can she. Oh, tell me, Tam Lin, she said, why came you here to dwell? The Queen of Fairies caught me when from my horse I fell, and at the end of 7 years she pays a tithe to hell. I so fair and full of flesh, I feared it be myself. Oh, but tonight is Halloween, and the fairy folk may ride. Those that would their true love win, at Miles Cross they must bide. So first let pass the horses black, and then let pass the brown. Run to the white steed and pull the rider down. For I ride on that white steed, the nearest to the town. For I was an earthly knight, they gave me that renown. Oh, they will turn me in your arms into a newt or a snake, but hold me tight and fear not, I am your baby's father. And they will turn me in your arms into a lion bold, but hold tight and fear not, and you will love your child. And they will turn me in your arms into a naked knight, but cloak me in your mantle green and keep me out of sight.
Turn me into a newt.
Yeah,
I got better.
That was beautiful, but I was a little bit disturbed by some of the things going on in that poem.
Oh, it's fairy world. It's kind of disturbing.
Turning into a snake as well. Was that?
Yeah, turn into a newt or a snake.
Oh my!
A newt, a snake, a lion, and then back into a human again.
Okay.
So
it's sort of a progression.
I think so. I think it's kind of it's her pulling him out of the fairy world.
Yeah. It's the newt that's the creepy part, I think. What do you think, Richard?
I like newts.
As a cryptozoologist.
Newts are nice. I like snakes as well.
I like snakes, yeah. Snakes are cool. Lions are cool. Lions are all right, you know.
And of course, if you are turned into a newt, you do get better.
Yeah.
As Monty Python will no doubt attest to.
What else floats? Cathedrals?
Churches.
Very small rocks.
Cider!
Very good.
I've quoted that movie way too much.
The Holy Grail.
Yes.
Monty Python's The Holy Grail, yes, of course. We all have quoted it way too much, I think. Thank you very much, Jonathan Dymond. That was excellent, lovely reading, and I'll have to have you back on again to read some more poetry, definitely. Our next up, we've got some old-time radio. Now, old-time radio is one of my favorite things, and I discovered it when I was a teenager and started really getting into it. And it's a little bit sad that we don't have too much old-time radio on nowadays, although I understand that BBC Tonight has some very interesting radio plays on Fright Night broadcast with some M.R. James and some other stuff. So it is still out there. There is still horror and sci-fi and mystery radio out there, just not as easy to find as in the old days. We're talking 30s to up to, well, about the 70s, really. You've got Mercury Mystery Theater, I think it's called, with Orson Welles, stuff like that. This play is from 1964. It's from a show called Theater 5, which to me is somewhat obscure. It's not one of the ones that ran for like 20 or 30 years, like Inner Sanctum Mysteries or X-1, or shows like that. As far as I can ascertain, it only ran for a year. Theater 5 aired on ABC's weeknight schedule, usually at 7 p.m. in the 1964 to 1965 season. And this is from the poster on the internet. In New York, however, WABC declined to schedule it because they were programming rock and other DJ shows. So a Jersey station carried it in the metropolitan area. So it's from New York, Jersey in 1964, and this is a sci-fi horror called Terror from Beyond from 1964. So we shall listen to that in a few moments. Do you listen to any old-time radio, Richard?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I find there's quite a lot of it online. Recently, someone on Facebook put up a wonderful link for old wireless plays for Halloween, a wonderful horror. And I'm a massive fan of M.R. James, and on YouTube there's a woman called Morgan Scorpion who has the most wonderful reading voice that reads horror stories old and new by people like Lovecraft and M.R. James and all sorts of people, and she does a wonderful job.
Yeah, but old-time radio, like old radio plays from the 40s, 30s and 40s.
Oh yes, yeah, as I was saying, this link before to these radio plays, they range from the 30s up to the early 70s. Mm-hmm. Most of them being in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah, that 40s and 50s does seem to be the best era. If anyone is interested in old-time radio, any of our listeners, there are a lot of websites online. The best website I found is called Internet Archive. It's archive.org, I think, and that is probably the most the largest assortment of old-time radio from all over the place, and from the 30s right up into the 70s. They've got an incredible collection. Some of them are not very clear. They're not the most incredible broadcasts, but they do have an incredible collection. And there are smaller archives in other places with old-time radio. So it's very, very accessible now. It used to be, when I was first getting into it, very hard to find it. And even in the early days of the internet, you had to sort of search for it and find it in these obscure archives. But nowadays, it's not so obscure, and it's out there. And it's just fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it took me ages to find. I was looking for the original radio play of Ray Bradbury's short story The Foghorn, which was the inspiration for the film Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. I eventually found it, but it took some poking around for quite a while, but it was worth it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. When I used to listen to Inner Sanctum Mysteries, which is also slightly obscure, weirdly, it had a host, a very creepy co-host that was welcome through the squeaking door to Inner Sanctum Mysteries, and you would love it, Richard, because he had these terrible, terrible puns. It's a little bit like Creepshow, if you know the film's Creepshow, where they have this strange host and introduces 3 segments. It's a little bit like that. It's basically Creepshow's based on this character.
Well, there are comics called EC Comics, not DC. EC Comics, and they specialised rather than in superheroes, in horror. And they always had hosts introducing the stories in the comic strips, and they would always end with some sort of dreadful pun.
Yeah.
But they were they bit the dust thanks to the Comics Code of America that was brought in after a guy called Frederick Wortham wrote a book called Seduction of the Innocent, which was a completely vacuous jumping on the bandwagon, saying that blaming all of society's ills on comics and violence in comics. So
just like video games today.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, those terrible video games destroying everyone.
Do you remember the video nasty scare in the early 80s? It was very similar to that. So like when in Batman, where the Joker was a psychopathic murdering fiend that made Hannibal Lecter look like Mary Poppins, instead they watered it down so he was just a jolly ribald nuisance instead. And it was the same with the horror comics, all bit the dust because they weren't allowed to show violence, and even they weren't allowed to show beads of sweat on people's faces and things like that.
Well, some of these old time radio, they're very occult, and they had one, for instance, called The Witch's Circle. There was another show called The Black Cat. And they just go into all kinds of strange occult slash sci-fi slash horror mysteries, sort of across genres in a sense, and it's very, very interesting. The other interesting part of it, just before we go into listening to it, is the advertisements, because on Inner Sanctum Mysteries, for instance, they have this thing where they would be sponsored by something, and Inner Sanctum Mysteries is sponsored by Lipton Tea, for instance, something which you wouldn't necessarily associate with horror radio, horror shows, but and they had like the person doing the advertisement would be in the studio live, would be actually there. So the host who's doing all these puns, this creepy host, would be introducing the show, and then he'd be saying something like, "So Mary, tell us how you like to enjoy horror stories." And then you'd hear, "Well, I like to enjoy horror stories with a nice cup of Lipton tea. Lipton tea is good for all occasions." And then she'd go into this little spiel, and they had this little back and forth little joke sort of vaudeville thing where they would both be on the show talking, and then she would go into her little advertisement about Lipton tea, and it's very, very funny. So they don't have it on every show, and I think maybe by the 60s it was sort of phased out, and we'll see if there's any advertisements in this broadcast, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes. But listen, it is a whole play, so it will be on for, I think it's about 20 minutes, but it's a very good story, and we'll be on shortly after that. And after that we have Philip John from the Force of Swords Theatre telling us some ghost stories. So we will see you soon. Goodbye.
Will stay where you are. You will not move. We have some preparations to make, and then something very odd happened. Half of Dr. Marlowe came alive. His right side first. His right eye lighting up while his left eye stayed dead. His right hand twitching while his left hand remained stiff. Half of him came alive. Only half.
Theater 5 presents Terror from Beyond.
John Parker! Are you getting this, John? You've got to get it! I don't have much time! They'll be coming back in a few minutes! Try to get it, John! Try and remember!
Huh? What's that? Did someone...
Remember! Try and remember! You will not remember. Do you understand? When we are gone, it will be gone, as if it had never happened, and you will not remember. But you've got to remember, John! You've got to! The whole future of mankind, of life on Earth, depends on it! You've got to!
I sat up in bed, listening. The surf was pounding at the foot of the cliff, but that was all. Had I really heard something, or just imagined it? I didn't know. All I knew was I was in a cold sweat. But that wasn't surprising after what had happened, the deaths and... Deaths? But they'd been accidents. Maybe if I went back over it from the beginning...
That's right, John! Start back at the beginning! Then maybe you'll remember! And you've got to! You've got to!
When was the beginning? When I arrived at the base, I suppose. Went to the administration building for that first briefing session with Dr. Marlowe and Roy.
Oh, it's good to see you again, John.
It's good to see you, Doctor.
Great to have you aboard, John. Did you mind our doing this? Pulling strings to have you assigned up here for a while?
Are you kidding? You said it was something interesting.
We think it is. As interesting and important as any space work that's being done anywhere today.
I know. We'll be putting a man on the moon in a few years, but if we're to go on from there, one of the things we should know is what we're likely to find. In other words, whether there's intelligent life anywhere in the solar system. That's why I hated leaving the old project.
You haven't. This is still part of the old project. Remember what our problem was on Vango?
Of course. A radio telescope can pick up any message from out there that might be beamed at us, but it's sometimes very difficult to tell precisely where it's coming from.
Exactly. Well, we're using a technique here that'll take care of that. A light beam, rather than radio waves.
You mean a laser?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we discussed that. We've already hit the moon with a beam no bigger than a pencil, but suppose you do establish a contact, how do you get your feedback, your response?
Well, we believe we've solved that problem, theoretically at least. But we needed an electronics specialist to work on it with us. That's why we requested you.
When do we start?
Right away. By the way, you're sharing a cottage with Roy. Now, why don't you go on down there with him? Drop your luggage, we'll get to work.
The work. I remember that. Weeks of it. Finally, the big night. The night of our first test. It was clear and cool. The ocean still, not thundering, but whispering at the base of the cliffs as if it were waiting. All the stars sharp and clear like signposts on the road to the infinite. Dr. Marlowe at the computer, Roy and I at the center console.
T-2.
Check.
By the way, Doctor, I meant to ask you before, what made you pick Deimos as our first target?
Well, it was a few weeks after you left the project. We got a message from there.
No.
Well, there was some question about it, John. First, as to whether it really was a coherent message, and second, as to whether it was from Deimos.
The British got a fix on it, too. And it was on the hydrogen wavelength, the one we always said anyone out there would use.
That's true. And even though we never got another one, I thought it was worth exploring further.
Of course. But that's fantastic.
Yes, it's an exciting prospect. But it's also a rather frightening one.
Why do you say that?
We're reaching out, John. We're getting close to the secret of matter, the origin of life, the mystery of the universe. Sometimes I become a little afraid. Afraid that we may stumble onto something that's too much, too big for us.
T-10 seconds.
Check. Power on. Give me a reading, John.
Vector 9, 18.2 and steady.
Time.
How long to contact?
3 minutes, 28 seconds.
We sat there tensely, watching our instruments and the clock. Then...
There it is, the feedback. We've done it.
The trick now will be to maintain contact. Wait a minute. What's that?
It sounds like a pattern. Listen. Even numbers.
Now odd numbers. Great Scott, do you think we've got something?
Follow it. Follow it. Start with an even series.
We started following the pattern, and we got nothing. We kept at it all night and most of the next day. Still nothing. Wait. The next night, it's starting to come back to me now. I remember. It was the sound of the generators that woke me. It was about 2 a.m. I padded out along the duct boards to the control building. The lights were on. I went in. And there was Dr. Marlowe. He was sitting at the control panel, and he was Strange. His eyes were open, but he didn't seem to see me. Dr. Marlowe? Dr. Marlowe, what is it? What are you doing? Dr. Marlowe! Then something very odd happened. Half of him came alive. His right side first. His right eye lighting up while his left eye stayed dead. His right hand twitched while his left one remained stiff. And then...
What? Oh, hello, John.
Is anything the matter, Doctor?
Oh, why should anything? Hey, what am I doing here?
Doctor, have you ever walked in your sleep before?
Not that I know of. Of course, I haven't been sleeping too well lately. Rather disturbing dreams, but... John, did you change this beam frequency?
No, Doctor. You must have done it in your sleep. Shall I switch it back?
No. Cut the power, but leave it. I'd like to look at it again in the morning. Do some thinking about it.
Somehow, neither of us mentioned it the next day. We just went on with our work, collecting data, trying for another contact, if it had been a contact. And that night, yes, it was that night that we discovered what it meant. The generators woke me again. I looked at my watch. It was almost 3 o'clock, and for some reason, I was terrified. The door of Roy's room was open. As I went by, I saw that his bed was empty. Then I was walking along the duckboards to the control building. The lights were on again. I looked in through the window. Dr. Marlowe was at the panel as he'd been the night before, with that same dead look on his face. And Roy was standing in front of him, talking to him. I could hear him through the window.
Dr. Marlowe! Dr. Marlowe, what is it? Is anything wrong? He's asleep. Walking in his sleep. Better get John.
He started toward the door. Then, apparently deciding he'd better not leave the generators on, he turned and went toward the master switch. And as he did, Dr. Marlowe moved. His face still dead, expressionless. He got up, took a heavy wrench, and followed Roy. Then, just as Roy put out a hand to throw the switch, he hit him. I saw Roy's body crumple to the floor. I stood there frozen, unable to move. Dr. Marlowe looked down at him for a moment with no sign of emotion on his face. Then, like a zombie, he went over to the workbench again, picked up an odd assortment of tools, and returned to Roy's body. He bent over him, looking at him as if he were a laboratory specimen. And as I realized what he was going to do, my paralysis left me. I shouted and started for the door, but just before I reached it, I tripped, hit my head, and that was the last I knew. I'm not sure how long I was out, but when I came to, I was lying in front of the door and a dark shape was bending over me.
John, what happened?
Keep away from me. Don't touch me. I saw what you did in there.
And where? When?
Just now in the control room to Roy.
What do you mean? I just came up here from my cottage. I had a bad dream, came out to get some air, and I found you lying here.
But I tell you, I saw you and...
And what?
I must have imagined it, dreamed it, because I thought I saw you kill him. We looked everywhere, but there was no sign of Roy. Then we hurried back to the control building and searched it again.
He's not here either, John.
No. Must be in my mind. Of course, if it had really happened, there'd be something, if not his body, at least his blood.
Where, John? Where would it be?
Right here in front of the master switch. But there's nothing.
No. Except that the floor is wet. Looks as if it's been scrubbed.
Hey, you're right.
John, did you change the beam frequency this way?
No, Doctor. You must have done it just the way you did last night.
Last night? You mean something happened last night, too?
You don't remember?
No. Tell me what you thought you saw happen tonight, whether you believe it or not.
Well, you were sitting at the control panel with your eyes open, but as if you were asleep.
Yes?
The generators were on, and the beam frequency was set the way it is now. Roy was speaking to you, but you didn't answer him. Then when he started to cut the power, you picked up a wrench and hit him.
I hit Roy?
But that's not the worst of it. After that, you picked up some tools and bent over him as if he were a laboratory animal. Telling you about it now, I know the whole thing's mad. It's impossible.
I wonder.
You mean it could have happened some way? Without your knowing it?
In the old project, and in this one. We've been listening for messages from out of space, trying to determine whether intelligent life exists anywhere in our galaxy. John, if it did exist, what form would it take?
Well, it wouldn't necessarily look like us with 2 arms and legs.
Exactly. And suppose it existed in a totally different form, in the form of electrical energy.
Electrical energy?
Why not? Isn't that the way the brain functions, giving off electromagnetic waves? And what do we know about Deimos? Suppose living beings existed there, in the form of complex electrical charges, and a channel were suddenly opened between it and the Earth.
Our laser beam? You mean they could travel down it, take hold of someone,
I'm speculating, John. Of course, even if it's true, we don't know if these entities are malevolent, dangerous, or not.
When they made you kill Roy?
Because he was going to shut off the transmitter, cut off contact with their base. As for the rest, well, they'd be very interested in the human body, particularly the brain. They'd want to examine it, study it.
Do you realize what you're saying, suggesting, Doctor? Intelligences from outer space, another world, the taking over of a man's body by forces that we...
Yes, John, I know what I'm saying. And while I'm only hypothesizing, I don't really believe it's possible. Do you own a gun?
Yes. So happens I do.
Well, start carrying it. And if you notice me doing anything strange, don't hesitate. Shoot. And shoot to kill.
I didn't go back to sleep that night, and I was convinced that I would never sleep again, because it would be then that it would be easiest for them to... No, I can't think about it. I won't, even now. I felt a little better in the morning. I went over to have another talk with Dr. Marlowe, but he wasn't at his cottage. He wasn't anywhere on the base, and no one seemed to know where he was. Then I called Colonel Gately at headquarters. No one there knew anything about Dr. Marlowe or Roy. But by that time, something had happened to me. It had all become blurred, like an old nightmare that you know was frightening, but whose details you can't remember. About a week later, the colonel called me and asked me to meet him at the police station in the town nearby.
You knew Swanson pretty well, didn't you, Parker?
Yes, of course.
Some fishermen found a body in their nets this morning. We'd like you to look at it.
Oh? All right.
Brace yourself. Here.
Good Lord. I can't be certain, but I'm fairly sure it's Roy. How did he die?
We'll have to wait for the coroner's report, but my guess is that he fell off the cliff.
And Dr. Marlowe?
Nothing new on him yet, but if they were together, his body may turn up soon, too.
He was a better prophet than he knew, because Dr. Marlowe came back that very night. I'd taken something to make me sleep. It was the only way I could sleep, but the sound of the generators woke me. I took my gun, went to the control building. The lights were on. I opened the door, and there was Dr. Marlowe. He was standing near the console, his face thin and drawn, and his eyes blank. And when he spoke, his voice was hardly human, as if someone was speaking through him.
It is unfortunate that you awakened, Parker. And even more unfortunate that you came in here.
What do you mean, Doctor? Where have you been, and why are you talking so strangely?
We have been looking over your planet, studying it and its life. Particularly, you, sir. so-called humans. We have found it very interesting. And now we are ready to go.
Go? Go where? Wait. You said we. Dr. Marlowe, have they...
You will stay where you are. You will not move. We have some preparations to make, and then...
Her voice, that horrible voice, broke off, and Dr. Marlowe swayed as if he were about to fall. I grabbed him, held on to him, and then his eyes changed, came alive. And when he spoke again, it was with his own voice.
John, for heaven's sake, help me. What? They got me. They took me that night. Took me all over the country, looking, examining, studying. They picked my brain, John. And now they're going to take me with them.
Take you?
Back to where they come from. Not my body, they're not interested in that. But the essential me. And in heaven's name, shoot, John, shoot me!
And now we are ready. Look here at his eyes. Look closely. Yes, like that. As your friend told you, we are taking him with us. But you will not remember what has happened. You will remember nothing. Do you understand? Because someday we may come back.
I stood there, frozen, holding Marlowe. Suddenly he broke my grip, pushed me away. Walking stiffly and mechanically, he went to the door, opened it, and went out along the duckboards to the edge of the cliff. Then, without hesitating, he stepped over the edge and disappeared.
Now do you remember, John? It's all true. They exist. And they've got me here. Not only that, but they may return to Earth again for others. And... John, they're coming back now. They're coming. Do something.
When I woke up about a half hour ago, I found this all written out on the pad I keep next to my bed. I remember some of what I'd written, but other parts, like Roy's murder and Dr. Marlowe's death, I don't recall at all. Either I'm mad, completely mad, or... No, I can't think about that. In any case, if I showed this to anyone, the world would think I was mad. There's only one thing to do. Tear it up. Every last page of it. Every last page of it. Every last page of it.
Supporting local talent. This is Phonic FM.
Hello, welcome back. This is Exe Files Paranormal Radio on Phonic FM 106.8. That was, what was it? Theatre 5, Terror from Beyond from 1964. We were talking a little bit about old-time radio before we went into that, and very interesting story. I think it was a very clear broadcast as well, because some of them are a little bit like, shh. They're from the 30s and you can't hear them very clearly, but I tried to find a clear one, so I think that was quite a good one, quite a interesting, strange story, and I think I really like the ending. Very Lovecraftian. No, I'm destroying all the manuscripts, I'm jumping off the cliff, and so on. Well, welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Alison Rockbrand. I'm here with my co-host, Richard Freeman. Hello, Richard.
Hello, and hello, wireless listeners.
We've got a special guest in as well. We have Philip John from the Four of Swords Theatre. He is going to tell us a ghost story. Hello, Philip.
Good evening, or good morning, it should be, I suppose. Thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, thanks so much for coming on.
Well, shall I introduce the story?
Absolutely.
So I was hoping to read for you a story from a book called Kwaidan, which is a book of Japanese ghost stories. And the story I'm going to read is called Mimi Nashi Hoichi. And I shall give you a translation of that title maybe at the end of the story, so it doesn't give anything away.
Sure. And
this story, there's perhaps two little bits of information which will help put this story in perspective. It's set in feudal Japan, and the first piece of information is that the role of blind people in feudal Japan. Blind people were often coerced into particular roles in which they were very highly prized. For example, a blind masseur, I suppose, because of his discretion, but also because sightless, that idea that it accentuates your other senses, and the blind masseur Zatoichi, of course, is the subject of his own series of stories and films, which are very popular, especially in the 60s and 70s in Japan. But some listeners may have heard of him. Another very popular role for blind people in the society of feudal Japan was, of course, the musician. Again, because of this idea that without sight, your other senses are accentuated or raised almost to superhuman levels. Now, the area that this story is set in is important, and the story actually starts off with a little bit of information on that. It says, more than 700 years ago, at Dan no Ura, there was fought the last battle of a long contest between the Heikei clan and the Genji clan. So the feudal Japan was characterized by lots of civil war, basically, lots of battles between rival clans, often for territory. And at this battle, called the Dan no Ura, the Heikei clan perished utterly, even the women and children, and their emperor, or their lord, who was only a child himself. And that sea and that shore have been haunted ever since. This haunting manifests in many peculiar ways. For example, there's a strange species of crab which is found there, called the Heikei crabs, which seem to have human faces on their backs, and are said to be the spirits of the Heikei warriors. There are a million other strange things to be seen and heard along that coast. On dark nights, thousands of ghostly fires hover about the beach or flit above the waves. They are called by the fishermen onibi, or demon fires, and whenever the winds are up, a sound of great shouting comes from that sea, like a clamour of battle. Now, these are the pieces of information that you need to understand in order to really appreciate this story. And the story starts at a Buddhist temple called Amidaji, which is near the town called Akamagaseki. I know it's hard to remember all these names, but Amidaji is the name of the temple. There was also a cemetery close by, near the beach, and within it were set up monuments inscribed with the names of the drowned emperor and his servants and loyal supporters, and Buddhist services were regularly performed there on behalf of the spirits. Now, at Akamagaseki there lived a blind man named Hoichi, who was famed for his skill in recitation and in playing upon the biwa, which is a particular Japanese instrument, a little bit like a lute. He became famous chiefly for his recitations of the history of the Heikei and the Genji clans, and it is said that when he sang the song of the Battle of Dan no Ura, even the goblins could not refrain from tears. At the outset of his career, Hoichi was very poor, and so the priest of Amidaji, who was fond of poetry and music, he invited Hoichi to the temple to play and recite. And being much impressed by the wonderful skill of Hoichi, he proposed that the blind musician should make the temple his home, and this offer was gratefully accepted. Hoichi was given a room in the temple building. Now, after some years of living in the temple, one summer night, when the hauntings associated with the dead clans was particularly feverish and frenzied, the priest was called away to perform an exorcism at the house of a dead parishioner, and he went there with his servant, leaving Hoichi alone in the temple. It was a hot night, and the blind man sought to cool himself on the veranda before his sleeping room. There on the veranda, Hoichi waited for the priest's return, and tried to relieve his solitude by practicing upon his biwa. Then he heard some steps approaching from the black gate. But they were not the restrained, dainty steps of a priest, neither were they the scuff of a beggar or a homeless person seeking refuge. Instead, it was the heavy clink, clink, clink of someone in full armor. A deep voice called out, "Hoichi!" Hoichi was startled for the moment to respond, and the voice called again, "Hoichi!" "Yes, answered the blind man, frightened by the menace in the voice. I am blind. I cannot know who calls. There is nothing to fear, the stranger exclaimed, speaking more gently now. I am stopping near this temple, and I have been sent to you with a message. My lord, a man of exceedingly high rank, is now staying in Akamagaseki. With many noble attendants, he wished to view the scene of the Battle of Dan no Ura. Having heard of your skill in reciting the story of the battle, he now desires to hear your performance. So you will take your biwa and come with me at once to the house where the assembly is waiting. In those times, of course, the order of a samurai was not to be lightly disobeyed. Hoichi immediately donned his sandals, took his biwa, and went away with the stranger, who guided him deftly, but obliged him to walk very fast. Hoichi's first alarm was over. He began to imagine himself in good luck. He could win great favor by performing his story for such an august lord and assembly. Presently the samurai halted, and Hoichi became aware that they had arrived at a large gateway. He wondered, for he could not remember any large gateway in that part of town. Kaimon! The samurai called, which is a formal request for the gates to be thrown open. There was a sound of unbarring, and the twain passed on. They traversed a space of garden and halted again before some entrance, and the retainer cried in a loud voice, Within there! I have brought Hoichi! Then came the sounds of feet scurrying, of screens sliding, of rain doors opening, and the voices of women together. By the language of the women, Hoichi knew them to be domestics in some noble household. After he had been helped then to mount some stone steps, upon the last of which he was told to leave his sandals, a woman's hand guided him along interminable reaches of polished planking, and round pillared angles too many to be remembered, and over widths amazing of matted floor, and into the middle of some vast apartment.